What's up everyone, Thralls here once again. I'm Necrotic Nick, and I have yet another album review. So, yet again, another one that I was heavily anticipating for the week of the 3rd of June was the newest offering from Temple of Void, Summoning the Slayer. This again comes out on the 3rd of June on Relapse Records. This is the band's first release on Relapse Records. The band formed in 2013 in Detroit, Michigan, so practically fucking hometown heroes. I mean, it's only about an hour away from here anyway. This is their 4th full-length overall. I have been a fan since I picked up Lords of Death on a whim, and pretty much just went after all their albums, got their debut of Terror and the Supernatural, and then we reviewed The World That Was when it came out. Actually got a thank you from the band, and in those comments they said that this album coming out, their next one, was going to be vastly different, because it's kind of a thing with this band is each album has been different, and there's a slow sort of lumbering evolution, and that's mostly because it is just nasty, dark, brooding death doom with loads of atmosphere and a fair amount of melody. And they're right, this new one is definitely different, but it's still very recognizable as Temple of Void. So if you are not familiar with this band, it is just gnarly, ugly, swampy death doom, but over the course of at least the last 2 albums, I would say it has evolved more. There's become more dynamics, more melody, and more surprises along the way. And this new one definitely has some new interesting flavors to it. There's a good chunk of this album that really kind of latches on to that classic death doom sound that was associated with, the Peaceville bands, Paradise Lost, My Dying Bride, and Catatonia. Early Catatonia especially, I would say there's a lot of stuff in here that reminds me of Brave Murder Day in particular. While there are flat out brutal chugs all over the place, there's a lot of spacey, melancholy atmosphere with clean guitars. This band doesn't really do like solos very much. They like lead harmonies, and the lead harmonies are particularly dreary and occasionally very evil sounding, but most of the time they just kind of latch on that very somber sound of a band like Catatonia in the early days. In fact, the vocals on here are very close to Ackerfeld's vocals in either early Catatonia, again, Brave Murder Day, or Bloodbath. Like, they are blood-curdling, gurgled, there's loads of reverb on them, and they just echo throughout the void that they built a temple to. Now, this album was produced by Arthur Risk, very well known for his work with Power Trip and Go Ahead and Die, and this album is sonically, I think, their best sounding album. I thought The World It Was definitely an improvement on the production. Like, I love the raw, gritty stuff of their earlier albums, but that more lavish full production for going for more dynamic songs really works well, and this album sounds absolutely huge. Right from the opening of Behind the Eye, you hear, of course, dripping ambience, which this band is really good with atmosphere, and then it opens up with this like backwards played opening riff. You hear the whooshing snare that's being, looped backwards, and then it just explodes into this giant, chunky, evil, dirty sounding riff, and pretty much sets the pace for this long, slow journey into hell, or maybe rather into the void. I don't know, both sound very unpleasant, and the overall sound of this is, well, for me, very pleasant because I love death doom, but for literally like anyone else that is like a non-metalhead, if you played this, they're just gonna look at you like you worship the devil. And at that point, you either show them the altar or show them the door, because you don't need that sort of negativity in your life. But this opening track, and then later on the album, Hex, Curse, and Conjuration definitely embody their more brutal side. In fact, Hex, Curse, Conjuration actually has a lot of like Floridian notes. Like, there's definitely a little bit of like old school obituary in there. Or maybe if you want to go across the pond in terms of a comparison aspects, like it has that sort of lumbering slow pace driven by insanely heavy guitars and just a overall just brutal feel. But it's songs like Death Touch, Engulfed, and the transcending horror that really seem to latch onto that classic death doom sound. And honestly, I would say like this is quite possibly one of their most melodic offerings. There are loads of melodies in here, though at no point would I say this is like a grasp at accessibility in terms of like mass appeal. Like, this band is flat out trying to be heavier than hell, but also include melody and atmosphere. And atmosphere is a real important thing on here. Again, not a lot of solos, but the clean harmonies in terms of the guitars and the more heavy harmonies really add a lot. Death Touch has these very dreary, clean harmonies that kind of run throughout it, and they add this sort of gothic melancholy to the whole song, and then you have a song like Engulfed where it has these descending harmonies that sound like you are spiraling straight down into a pit of hell and add a much darker, sinister vibe. This album is trying to like latch on to the darkness in different ways here, and I really like that. It makes it a more adventurous listen. It's not just all brutality or all melancholy. It's a good mix of both. And the other thing they do well with atmosphere is how it transitions from track to track. Almost every track transitions with kind of a similar ambience, but it fits, and it kind of gives the whole album like a cohesive flow. There's always a bit of like atmospheric noise or ambient noise in the background and like dripping like you're in a abandoned house, which is entirely possible in Detroit. Could be a cave, but this is Detroit, and they got a lot of abandoned houses there. But it's little things like that that really brings the album together. That, and of course the songwriting. I think the songwriting here is top notch. I think The World That Was a little bit more expansive. They were definitely reaching out, like in terms of a jump in style, in terms of expanding their sound. From Lords of Death to The World That Was, it was definitely a big reach in terms of expanding like everything they do and including a lot of new elements. And they did it really well. That album, I think, is absolutely fantastic and surprised the living shit out of me. But this album feels more focused on a particular sound and a particular vibe. Like this isn't trying to be like a big expansive, like not necessarily proggy album, but definitely more far-reaching. This feels focused on just being dreary and melancholy, but also being brutal too, and they do both of those really well on here. And they do include some different elements on here, some stuff that I thought was a little bit surprising. The opening of A Sequence of Rot, which is a pretty interesting title, actually starts off kind of industrial-ish. Like it's a bass line with like sort of an industrial drum pattern, like kind of similar to like Nine Inch Nails or like Godflesh. And then it explodes into, I think, some of the coolest riffs on the entire album. There is a cool like bass line breakdown when the guitars come in, so you get these isolated tremolos in between these big chunky riffs on here. And it's just a nasty, brooding song, and the vocals on there sound extra just gurgly, namely because the bass dropout kind of lets them carry out a little bit more. You can make them out more distinctly, and it just sounds flat out fucking evil, and I like that sort of thing. And I would say this is a very concise album. It is just over 40 minutes long, and honestly, it's one of those albums that feels like it should be longer. Like, the songs are very, big, but honestly, like, most of the songs in here aren't that long. Like, there's no tracks on here over 10 minutes, which is, like Death Doom, of course, there's going to be longer songs, but it feels very concise, very focused. It flows very well. And I kind of like that it is a very concise listen, because like you can go through this one really easily, and again, from track to track, I think it flows very well. Albeit for maybe one moment towards the end. The last track, Dissolution, is the most different track on here. It is mostly acoustic with like, guitar harmonies and keys and ambience and clean vocals. And clean vocals were not necessarily a strange thing for Temple of Void. They actually had them on the last album, and they worked really well, and they work really well here. It's just, I don't know if this should have been the close of the album. Like, the rest of this album is brooding and dark, and this is still dark. It's just sort of a different approach to it. It's a little bit softer, again, more like gothic melancholy, like it's very somber, but the oppressive nature of the album has kind of been taken away there. And honestly, I would have switched it with the Transcending Horror, which I think would have been a great closer on here, because it caps off the album as brutally and as dynamically as it opened up. And honestly, that little break in between, that little somber break with Dissolution, probably would have set up the next track very well. But outside of that, I think this is an incredibly strong album. And again, sonically, I think it is the best sounding album they have put out. And the fact that they kind of latched onto that early Peaceville Death Doom sound, that's such a classic sound. I look for that in terms of Death Doom often, and man, did they fucking nail it. So overall, I'm going to give this 4 stars. This is a banger. Again, a little bit of track flipping around on there, and I think it possibly would have flowed a little bit better, but literally pretty much everything else on here I loved. It isn't as like expansive and far-reaching as their last album, but it didn't need to be. This one is way more focused, and I like that vibe as well. The songwriting is stronger than hell. The songs flow very well individually. I like the transitional atmosphere in between songs. I think that makes the album flow really well too. I love the fact that you can hear the evolution of this band from release to release. Like, they keep getting better as musicians. They keep taking more chances to try to expand their sound. And honestly, the results have been fantastic so far. This, I don't know, like between the last one and this one, those two might be my favorites, but I like Lords of Death too just because of how fucking brutal and heavy it is. But they haven't sacrificed much in the way of brutality on this one at all. It's still brutal when it needs to be, and it has way more of that gothic, melancholy vibe. But they've gotten really good at that, which adds so much to this album. Strongly recommend this one, especially, again, if you are a big fan of like early Catatonia, My Dying Bride, Paradise Lost, all that shit. If you like stuff like that, this should be a really easy fit. Definitely check this band out. So, if you enjoyed this review, give it a thumbs up, and if you are new to the channel, subscribe because we do stuff like this all the time. We're also on Patreon. If you'd like to help us out there will be a link down below. We are going to do like a little Patreon response thing towards the end of the month, I believe. And it will be like a Ask Us Anything type video, so that one I anticipate to be some fun. So yeah, we're just waiting for more questions to get on there. So yeah, if you're on Patreon, ask us some more questions, and don't be afraid to get weird because we're fucking weird. Also, there will be a link down there to thrallsmetal.com if you'd like to get one of our kick-ass shirts. There will also be a link down there for the Denver Death Fest submissions. So if you are in a band and you are watching and you want a chance to play at a Death Fest all the way out in Denver, click the link down below. There is an entry form, and that's pretty much all it takes. This will take place from September 30th through October 2nd. And we still need some band submissions so we can go through them and pick out who's going to be on the fest. And you have till June 15th to do so, so there is a limited window, but get on it if you are interested. And yeah, we're looking forward to seeing how this turns out and maybe making it like an annual thing. And of course, what would the end of the video be like if I didn't thank the living fuck out of you guys? You all fucking rule. Thank you so much for watching, subscribing, liking, commenting, all that shit. We love doing this. It has been an absolute blast, and it keeps getting more fun and more big. I think we built a killer community here, and it's only getting bigger. And honestly, it is all due to you. I mean, we put in a little bit of the work, I think, but it's you guys that keep us going. So with that, once again, I thank you all, and we will catch you later.